Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next edition of AmiSights. And today I've got two special people with me. I've got my co-host Lynn Ozer, ABA SBA Queen, and I've got Verne Harnish, ABA Scaling Up King. So we've got the Queen and the King, and we can have an interesting conversation. So Verne, it's always good to have you on, and thank you for being with us today, all the way from Nova Scotia today, I think.
You got it. And Ami, thank you. All the way back since in the pandemic, we had you on every, I think, week almost, helping everybody just bail out of all of that. And you're our favorite guy seriously, go-to guy for folks to really get smart about using debt. And, that's been my whole theme, that I think companies need to pee themselves. And I stand up in front of the EO audience and the YPO and say, you guys got to pee yourself. They're like, what do you mean? And you've got to do to yourself what private equity has been doing to our entire market. So let's get into all these topics.
Let's dig into it. So you talk about having people PE themselves. I talk about the same idea about the private equity myth.
Yeah.
And when people say it's all this hoorah-rah of the private equity industry, and you wrote about this in your newsletter a couple of weeks ago, is hitting some walls with higher rates. But why should someone sell to private equity? What are they going to do for them that they can't do for themselves?
And that's the point. We ought to do to ourselves what they would do, because all they're doing is taking one part of our equity, blending it smartly with debt, and using our own then increased profitability that they're using the debt to fuel to pay off that debt. And now they've got all your equity. And so let's do it to ourselves. And so I've got a client in St. Louis. It's not technology or anything. They are commercial landscapers. And John Mooney, started out mowing lawns, and has clawed his way up to about 25 million in revenue at the time, 9% EBITDA. And companies in that space sell for 6 times earnings. So he had a good company worth 13.5 million, had about 3 million debt. So he had a net worth of 10. We've been able to triple his net worth in about a year and a half, just by smartly using bank debt and doing 4 acquisitions as a result. And we can get into the details. But John is now seeing that even in a plain old business like that, industry like that, this opportunity to scale via acquisitions is the opportunity. And as you know, that's the book I'm finishing up right now, is how to scale through acquisitions.
So there's 2 parts to that. I want to go into that theme of scaling through acquisitions, but I want to dig in wide. Let's talk about what private equity does, because,
all right.
And I'm going to ask you a question. Have you ever seen a book about private equity disasters?
I haven't, but there's nobody writes books even about entrepreneur disasters, right? Nobody wants to write about that stuff.
But some on the EO message boards, there was a conversation, I don't remember the details, a couple of weeks ago, about people saying, who sold to private equity and had a quote unquote big bite on the apple on the back end, and when did it go well?
Yeah, the second bite rarely goes well. We have a few friends, Rich Manders and others it has, but they went with real reputable firms like Riverside.
So the point I want to make, and I think, Verne, you're agreeing with me, is that if you're going to sell to private equity, what I always try to advise people is that the cash, that's spelled CASH, at the closing table has to be enough. So pardon my French, if they fuck it up on the back end, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And you could buy it back.
Correct.
I think let's start with the fundamental premise. Wealth is created through transactions. A lot of guys have cash flow, earnings, revenue, but wealth is only created through transactions. And I don't see entrepreneurs doing enough transactions and moving sooner than later. So I'll give you an example. I learned it first from Ted Leonsis. Ted, one of our founding board members of YEO, now EO, Ted had a little company called Redgate. He sold it to Harris Communications. He was in his 20s for $5 million. Harris then blew it up and he was able to buy it back for $1 million. So he made $4 million in the arbitrage. He then took Redgate, then sold it to AOL. Steve Case became Steve Case partner in scaling up AOL. So he leveraged again Redgate into that. And then AOL did the famous deal with Time Warner. At the time, the biggest transaction in the history of Wall Street. And Ted then took that cash, he was smart enough, and bought the sports teams that he owns today. And he's been able to ride that up. And so it's been a series starting with that first transaction in his 20s, where he took his initial small company and used it twice in order to leverage up. And I think that's what entrepreneurs have got to get a little bit more wise about.
And I think
what happened to, I'm just curious. So private equity bought him for $5 million and private equity screwed it up?
No, that was a company, Harris Communications.
Oh.
But it doesn't matter whether it was a company you sell to or you sell to private equity. Probably easier if you sell to a company and they blow it up, then they just want out. And man, the number of times entrepreneurs have been able to buy it back for cents on the dollar, and they benefited from that transaction. And I think we got to do more of that.
I do think it would be interesting for our community if someone were to go out and memorialize. So my brother's company, for example, they sold years and years ago 60% to private equity. I'm not complaining. I'm not whining from them. He got enough cash at the closing table. Okay.
Right.
But at the day that they sold, they had 40 employees in the US. 30 days later, they had 120 employees because the guys on the corporate jets knew so much more.
Yep.
And 4 years and 364 days later, they were bankrupt. And it happens time and time again that these guys come in, or women, I shouldn't say guys, or people, to be totally politically correct, and they screw it up.
Well, that happened with John Ratliff's.
Sure.
John scaled up. First of all, I think he really is the poster child for what entrepreneurs can do. He started a call center. I mean, this is what we call a shitty business, answering phones, sleeping there by the phone. Then through 24 buy-side acquisitions that he used all bank debt. He never put a dollar of equity in of his own or had to raise it. He scales to 650 employees and he sells it to a $2 billion company for 14 times earnings, a public company multiple. And they then proceeded to do a bunch of acquisitions and messed him up. They didn't follow. They bought him because of John's acquisition model. They then thought they were smarter than John and the folks. And Arnie, Ami, you heard that they unloaded all of that, like 3 or 4 times than the size of John's company, for less than what they paid John.
Happens all the time.
And John almost just bought it back. It's like, and how can I? But anyway, wealth is created through transaction.
Yeah. Now let's go back, and I want to maybe, Verne, this will be helpful for you for your learning, but also for the learning of the community. And because there have been, and SBA is not the only way to buy businesses, but there have been some changes to SBA rules over the last few months that I think people should know about. Good. So typically the SBA cap. Now, the reason, again, if you're going to make acquisitions, the primary benefit, and Lynn knows more about SBA lending than anyone in the world, although she's too shy to say so. Yeah. The primary benefit of getting the SBA loan is they're going to give you 10 years to pay it back. Right. And so 5 years versus 10 years makes a big difference.
Yes.
The rule used to be that the maximum that any one individual could have on an SBA loan at any time is $5 million.
Yeah.
Now, and let me make sure I'm getting this right. If you buy businesses in different industries, it's $5 million per SIC code. And so you can, yeah, that's a big difference. And the other change in SBA rules lately now is you can also use an SBA loan to buy or sell a part of a business. You don't have to buy or sell 100% of a business in or out. So if someone wants to buy half a business or 80% of a business or 70% or 10% or whatever it is, you can now do that with SBA loans. It's not that SBA loans are the only trick in town. They're not. Okay, sometimes it doesn't make sense, and sometimes people reach their cap. But if people are considering their first acquisition or two,
Yeah.
there's a tremendous benefit of using that 10-year leverage and always concentrating on your monthly payment.
That is huge. Why aren't more of us setting up little PE-like firms, going into our community, identifying some real cash cows that the owners are just, in their late 60s, early 70s. They have kids who don't want to take it over. They want out, and you could put together the fact that you've got 5 million for each different category. SIC code is unbelievable. Ami, I'm going to do it tomorrow. I'm calling you, my friend. It's brilliant. All right.
Now, people, again, tied to the acquisitions, let's go through some issues that people think about and worry about. So, again, it's PEing yourself. So the question I would ask the entrepreneur is, what is that PE firm going to bring to you that you can't do for yourself?
Yeah.
And sometimes they have some technical expertise or wisdom or this or that. Like a friend of mine, their cardiology practice just bought it. And I said to them, what the hell are you doing? Just get some professional management here.
Yeah.
You can borrow the money. You just need a professional management team. But they couldn't get over it. They were so excited, and they didn't get any cash at the closing team.
Yeah.
They were so excited to be getting the PE money. So take a cold shower, folks, listening to this, and say to yourself, what is this group going to do for you that you can't do for yourself?
And so let me dig in a little bit to John Mooney's transaction. Part of the key was his strength was sales and customer service. They become the premier in their industry in St. Louis. They do the landscape, they maintain the Cardinal Stadium, WashU's campus, the stuff that needs to be premier. But as a result, he was running 9% EBITDA. The best in his industry run 18%. And so he really was lacking that operations person that could be his counterbalance to bring that efficiency to his outstanding customer service. So the acquisition we did in Oklahoma City was of a young guy, Brett, who had scaled to about 8 million. John was at 25, who was running 18% EBITDA, but he didn't know how to sell. So by putting those two together, all of a sudden they complemented each other. And with two other acquisitions, with Brett's operational efficiency and John's customer service, they were able to essentially go double revenue in a year to 50 million at a 12% EBITDA. So Brett was already able across all of the business, get him 3 more points, and he's going to get the other 6. And that then is what's allowing them to pay easily the debt they had to take on to do those acquisitions. So I do think you've got to be smart and say, maybe through an acquisition, I can get the talent, the professional. So I would say to your cardiologist, hey, is there another cardiology practice that has some really good management that we could team up? Because that's all the PE firms are going to be doing. And that way you just acquired the professional management that you needed without having to give out all of this equity.
Well, they could have hired in that particular case. Better make sure my friend doesn't listen to this series because he'll be pissed at me, but I'm not using his name. But in that case, a cardiologist has been running their practice for 12 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So acquisitions is important. But one of the things wherein that I heard you say once in a talk, I can't remember where, was that um, the time to throw the fuel on the fire is when you figure out your model.
Yeah, for sure. Well,
And
by the way, I love to get credit. That really was Jim Collins. Jim's research found that you don't want to add cash, fuel, till you have figured out the model for sure.
And that's for
Interesting.
earlier stage companies. That's something that we see all the time, is that in the early stages, people often use debt because they have no choice and they do a bunch of stupid things, but they're just trying to survive.
Yes.
And then if you get through those years, you have PTSD, and then you have fear of debt, and you never want to go back into it again. But the irony of it is that once you've actually figured out your model, the debt is at that point much less risky.
Ami, you perfectly said.
Yeah. And one of the things we're doing a bunch of research and work on now, Verne, is we're doing deep interviews with entrepreneurs to try to understand their risk profile, how they think about risk.
Yeah. And to go with that, it's why we're really focused on this idea of a Moneyball stat. When you really understand your business model, you can boil it down to one metric. And then if this is where we want to apply cash in order to continue to deliver on this Moneyball stat. So, for instance, the overused example, Southwest Airlines, they said, hey, we want to be lower than bus fare. How are we ever going to make money? Well, we've got to get wheels up 2 hours more than any other airline. That's their Moneyball stat. And that's where you want to then fuel the business, is what are all the things that help us get the wheels up 2 hours more. That's why they've been able to be profitable as a low-cost airline. By the way, I just met Jack Gantz. Jack's got Chemist Warehouse. Their promise, you're going to buy your deodorant, your hairspray for 25% less. So how is he ever going to make any money? And his Moneyball stat is, because if you're going to come in and get your deodorant, you've got to leave with at least $100 worth of other stuff. And that's his Moneyball stat. And that's where he then focuses all of his fuel, is on what do we have to do to make that happen. And once he has that formula, now he's got the business model worked out, and he's opening a store now every 6 weeks.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. Really.
So
Verne, what are some of the biggest
Moneyball
challenges you're seeing clients or people in the scaling up community confront right now?
Here is the number, and it plays into what you guys need to look at to help fund companies. The number I'm having the EOers I just spoke to calculate. What is your total gross margin dollars divided by your total compensation you're paying everyone? Take out owner comp, because EBITDA. Well, most folks don't know EBOT, earning before owner theft. So you got to take out EBOT. And so what we're seeing is, because prices have really gone up in your own supply, and there's all these wage pressures, that number has gone to pieces. We got a client in the travel business. Their revenue was up 40% last year. Yet, because the underlying costs were up, their margins came down, and the people's wages went up, their gross margin dollars divided by their total comp dropped in half, Ami. And the only way I think you're going to be bankable is for you to deal with that issue. And that's where pricing strategy and compensation strategy, our new book, Scaling Up Compensation, really are playing an important role. And I'll just say, I don't think enough entrepreneurs are spending enough time on their comp strategy and on their pricing strategy in order to improve that one metric.
Yeah. But I'll go even one step deeper, Vernon.
Please.
This is, I think, applicable to many size companies. If you don't know, like we're building houses, we're building palaces or whatever it is, but a house without good plumbing or electrical wiring system is going to eventually fall apart on you.
Yeah.
And all of this stuff, the pricing strategy, the compensation strategy, all the work we do with Power of One, we have Jonathan Bond on our webinars twice a month and all that.
Right.
But you ever heard of the saying CISO?
No.
Oh,
Shit,
yes.
shit in, shit out.
Yeah.
And if people's fundamental accounting is off,
Yeah.
and bookkeeping is off, and your financial reporting is off, all of these tools, all this analysis, all your ability to forecast, all your ability to project, or all your ability to scale is useless. I had a guy, I think I told this story at the last Scaling Up confab. I had a guy in one of my hot seats a couple months ago, and he was paying like $8,000 a month for EOS or something. But he was a year behind in his accounting. His cash flow was all screwed up, and he was struggling to make payroll every 2 weeks. And so I put that out on the old message board. I said, with all due respect, that coach is doing malpractice.
Yeah.
And if the fundamental bookkeeping and accounting isn't in order, how can you even make strategic decisions about the business?
Yeah.
How can you use scaling up? How can you use Power of One if the numbers you're putting in are wrong? And a lot of times, Vern, they're wrong.
Well, it's one of the reasons why and I'm always surprising my audiences. I'm adamant that the second biggest weakness inside entrepreneurial firms is accounting. And they're like, what? And I says, because it's an equal leg of the three-legged stool: buy low, sell high. And I ask them, have you guys ever heard of this? Buy low, sell high. That's the first law of entrepreneurial gravity. And are like, yeah. I said, well, you're violating it every day. Why? Because the record keeping, the third leg, is terrible. And all you have to do is hire the one right person, even part-time, who will come in and just give you a piece of paper that says where you made money and where you didn't make money by job, by customer, by location, by salesperson. When you finally have the right numbers, you're going to make a bunch of right decisions. And just to give everybody some air coverage, Michael Dell even messed this up. Michael went from a 0 to $1 billion in 7 years, and he grew broke. They literally ran out of money. The board fired everybody but Michael, and they brought in Tom Meredith, my friend, who was his first real CFO. And the first thing Tom did was create a whole series of waterfall graphs. They go off site, as Tom shared with me, and he showed Michael the numbers, where they're making money and where they're not. Michael's not dumb. He had bad numbers. The minute he got the right data, they got that ship righted immediately. But that's what the board was smart enough to see, that Michael didn't have anybody who could get him the numbers he needed in order to make better decisions. So I just want to second, third, and fourth exactly what you say.
Yeah, we're working on a service with a partner, Vern, that I think is really needed.
Yeah.
Where they'll come in, the price point will be a few $1,000s, and they're not going to audit your books. They're going to audit your processes. And they're going to check in on, do you have the right people, processes, and controls in place for the stage of your company for where you are? Because the other thing is there can be theft, there can be all kinds of things going on. Sometimes I meet entrepreneurs and they don't know if they have 100,000 of AR or $1 million of AR.
But let me also add to that. One of the things we've been pointing out is you need your numbers daily, but accounting's not capable of doing it. It's not in their DNA because I don't want to give you a number. I haven't scrubbed 6 ways to Sunday, as my late father would say. And so here's the key. We've done this with so many clients. The people doing the work should report out numbers daily. So I'm going to give you a very practical. My brother-in-law was running a group of repair guys for office equipment. All right. And they had a sense that they were just throwing parts at the problem. They were spending $85,000 a month on repair parts. So what I coached Joe to do, and here's what he did, is he had every one of his repair guys call in every day and just tell them the dollar amount of parts they'd installed. First of all, nobody even knew what parts cost. We've so divorced people from what they do and the cost of what it is that they do. And so they just started reporting in. I used $237, $462, $3. Then he got them together once a week. And he said, I'm not here to criticize. I just want to talk about, Dave, why you needed so many parts, and Mary, you didn't need as many. Maybe we've got some machines that take too much we need to pull out of the field. Maybe there's some training we need to do. Long story short, and he also measured one thing, the callback ratio. You don't want the callback ratio to improve. 3 months later, Ami, the dollar amount of parts dropped from 85,000 to less than 40,000. That's $500,000 in savings and cash flow. And then the job of accounting is to square up that the field isn't BSing you. And you know what you find out? All entrepreneurs I've met in the early days of their business will get financials and they'll say, wait a second, I know that number's wrong. And the accountants are like, how do you know? Because I'm in the business every day. So one last story. We had a client, Richard, out of Seattle. They mine stone out of China. They built Larry Ellison's palace, for instance, in San Francisco. Richard Rhodes was his name. Richard started having his people in the field report what was going on. He then matched that up with the financials he was getting from his Chinese partners. And guess what? He found out they were ripping him off to the tune of millions. So people have to realize that you need this check and balance. You need the people doing the work to report to you the numbers daily. That way they feel it and stay in touch. That's how you keep accounting honest. And accounting's job then is to keep the field honest. And that is the essential tension that entrepreneurs have to have. Or as you know, Ami, if we had a nickel for every entrepreneur at our CEO boot camp that told us the horror stories of being embezzled by their accounting department, oh my gosh.
And you don't think it's going to happen to you. It's just like if you get into a business partnership, you think it's always going to be peaches, right?
Exactly. So anyway, I think we've got to have both. The field reporting the numbers so they actually feel it and can do something about it. And then accounting keeps them honest and vice versa.
Verne, I have an EO member whose name I won't mention. She wants to get, and I've tried to convince her for months that this is a problem. If she wants to get a report on her numbers, she has to call her accounting firm, and it's a 2-week wait. That's not okay. How can you run your business that way?
Yeah. But again, right, I would say to her, get the numbers from the people doing the work. Because they know. They know.
Something's wrong.
That's right. Something's wrong. I'll tell you one other story. So my first client in Canada, I'm up here in Canada, a company called AltaGas. And I meet the CEO and he's a nervous wreck. I'm like, David, what's going on? He goes, I'm supposed to give guidance to our market, but I can't get numbers from accounting for like months. So I go to Patricia, the CFO, and I go, Patricia, what's going on? Well, we've got this $2 million system we're going to put in with all of these da-da-da-da-da. I'm like, David, how long is it going to take? A year. I said, David's going to die of a heart attack. So I go back to David. I said, what do you need to know? He said, I only need to know two numbers, the gigajoules of energy we're producing daily and our variance to our maintenance budget. So long story short, we got each of the guys at the plant to just read a dial. Like, why don't you just read the dial every day, call Patricia's office? We had one person at Patricia's write down the numbers. David said, I don't even need to know all of them. These 5 make more difference than the other 50. Anyway, within a week, we had a number in front of him every day. And the people running the plants all of a sudden started paying attention to the production of their plant. Now, variance to maintenance budget. Here's what actually happens. The maintenance guy goes into the parts company, the place they buy parts. Hey, give me this part. They then hand him a piece of paper and they say, sign it. He doesn't even look at it, right? He just signs it. This piece of paper then has to get by the supplier, all gathered together. That takes a month. They send it to Patricia's office. Takes her another month to do the PO invoice matching process. And David doesn't know how many parts we bought a week, 2 months ago. So all we did was give notepads to all the maintenance guys and say, when you buy a part, just ask one additional question. What did that part cost? Write it down, or parts. What was the total? Write it on a notepad. And at the end of the week, call it in. Within 2 weeks, David's got the dollar amount of parts, because that was really, his labor was fixed because they were all people on his payroll, but it was the dollar amount of parts, that the variance of that. The other thing that happened when they started talking weekly, they realized they were paying wildly different prices for the same part. And the maintenance guys sorted that out. That company, Ami, became one of the best performing in Canada, that they became what became called an income trust. Their performance was so consistent. And David went from a nervous wreck to a year later, trusting his numbers, because he got them daily and weekly from the folks doing the work. And then Patricia's office job was just to confirm that what they're telling you in the field is right. So it's that simple. Get your maintenance guys, get your plant operators, get the people doing the work. I had to report every day as a speaker for Career Track the dollar amount of sales I made at the back of the room. He didn't wait for that to be totaled up and sent in. I had to call in every day. What was the dollar amount of sales I made in the back of the room? How many attendees were in the room? That way, we were checking and balancing our partners in the field who were running the workshops. And Jimmy knew his numbers daily.
Let me ask you a challenging question, my friend.
Yes.
Is there enough of this stuff that we'd be talking about good, solid accounting and processes and controls in the cash part of scaling up?
Look, I think it's throughout the book of Scaling Up. We emphasize the importance of accounting from the very beginning, the first chapter, of having these numbers. And I tell this AltaGas story in there.
You think that when we teach scaling up to the accelerators, and when they're at the
No.
250 to $1 million range, this is the stuff we should be talking about. They're not ready for power of one or all this stuff.
Right.
And I think we miss that because we get them. I sat through a cash thing a couple of months ago, and they were teaching profit first, right? And I was like, half their fucking balance sheets are wrong, guys. Read that.
You know what, Ami, you are right. They just have got to get and that, by the way, that's the power of the daily huddle. If whoever is accountable for that number, not accounting, but is the person delivering on the number of doors we're managing, if we've got a bunch of real estate guys were here in the EO group. If you have to report out every day the churn of our doors, the tenants, and you hear that number every day, you got a good gut feel for what's going on in the business way before you get the financial statements that are going to be wrong anyway, to your point. And if you really know what your Moneyball stat is and you're hearing it every day, you're going to run a great business. But so you're right. We've got to get, what are the handful of numbers I need to hear daily from the people? I'll even tell you one other interesting story. So John had 24 sites. And I know we're talking about accelerators here, but it's still, you can see it in
Principles apply.
he created a Moneyball stat for each location. It was like the quarterback efficiency rating. And it required the local leader to go into their systems and pull 4 numbers and crunch them together. And they were then to report to John every day. So John knew every day the performance in the last 24 hours of his locations. There were 5 that continued to just be dogs. And he couldn't figure out why. But in Salesforce, because he ran everything on Salesforce, it tells you who actually entered the number. In the 5 locations that were dogging it, that local leader had delegated the pulling and calculating of those numbers and the entering of it to John to an underling. So they were not feeling the numbers firsthand. When John saw that and said, look, your job as a leader is to look at the numbers and calculate that number yourself. It takes 15 minutes. The performance of those 5 dog locations met the other 19. So I think people underestimate the power of the person doing the work having to say. We were given speech 100,000 years ago. We were only given Excel spreadsheets 50 years ago. I think we're much more highly developed to feel and sense patterns and get a good gut feel for the business by speaking and hearing the data instead of staring at Excel spreadsheets.
Like every Monday, our Monday huddle with our entire team, we go through our pipeline, and the people have to report on this, and the pipeline's organized by expected closings in 2-week increments, and everyone has to report on their status of that particular loan. And I, as the leader, can watch it, and I can say, okay, well, I know it's not all going to close, but if half of what's expected to close in the next 2 weeks goes, we're fine. And that's the same idea you're talking about. It's that feeling that I have nothing to worry about. So
bingo, you got it.
Although it still looks,
appreciate you bringing that up.
Still looks like a bad EKG chart sometimes, but that's okay. So,
hey, you know what? At least you know it sooner than later.
Exactly.
The worst part is you wake up 6 months from now and you've had a heart attack, right?
The other thing, just that I think you'll agree with me about this, Verne, is that I strongly advise and coach entrepreneurs, a line of credit should be part of the furniture of your business. You should not use it. It's there for working capital, seasonality, and emergencies and the unexpected. But when things are going well, people think that things are just going to go great forever. But we all know that poo-poo happens at places along the journey. And having a line of credit is, people say, I'm afraid of debt, I don't want a line of credit. I go, when it comes time to, if you need a line of credit, when it comes time to use it, then you'll decide if you're afraid of debt or not.
Well, and that's why, I count it one of the top 5 business books of all time, and that was Jim Collins' Great by Choice. Everybody says Good to Great, Built to Last, but those books were written for Fortune 500 companies. But Great by Choice, which I don't think sells nearly as much as it should, it's a much better book than any of the others he wrote, was written about us guys, us scale-ups. And my favorite chapter in there is called Return on Luck, ROL. And it was in that chapter when he studied luck. He said, all right, do the companies that just happen to become great have more just good luck, right? And what he found is that they had slightly more bad luck. That really caught him by surprise. So he said, all right, What was the difference? And to me, that's a number we need to talk more about. The great companies had access to 3 to 10 times the cash that their competitors did. That way, and that's why I called it return on luck. When you've got bad luck, you need cash to survive. And when you've got good luck, you need cash to take advantage of it.
Right.
I have a
So
slide. I have a slide I use where in my talks. On a football field, an offensive and a defensive player ready to kill each other.
yeah,
And I say, this is finance strategy. You need to be prepared for the unexpected.
yeah.
And you both on the positive and the negative.
So your whole idea to have that line of credit there,
Right?
that's for both good luck and bad luck.
Bad luck, absolutely. Verne, where do people? I know a lot of people in our community know you and the community, but what's the books? Where do they go? Where do they find you? All that good stuff.
Well, Ami, one of the things that we talk about is a lot of our listeners, if you're honest, have really dumb company names. And we were guilty as charged. I thought it was so clever that I called my company Gazelles. It's the name they give growth companies in the economy, but nobody could even spell it. How many Z's, how many L's? It was like really an idiotic. So back when I released the book Scaling Up, I bit the bullet and we changed the name to Scaling Up, and we changed our website to scalingup.com. That's all an easy way for me to say. All you have to do is remember scalingup.com. And right there in the banner, we have access to all the growth tools that are free of charge. There's a mini Scaling Up course free of charge. There are chapters from the book free of charge. This is missional for me. And even EO, I launched as a nonprofit. So we got a lot of free stuff right there in the banner at scalingup.com.
Some of the most incredible, insightful, passionate, caring, brilliant coaches out there in the world are part of the Scaling Up community as well.
283 and growing strong.
I love it.
Congratulations.
You're going to be with us. You're going to be with us next week when we have a big
Next week
gathering.
at Tuesday. Yeah. Verne, thank you so much for the time. It's always a pleasure to be with you. And
So nice to meet you.
look you
Thank
good.
you.
And looking forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, and Ami, thank you for continuing just to, one of the things I pointed out is if you want to get good at golf or tennis, you got to review the fundamentals every stroke. And the fact that you're on message every podcast, pounding away at these fundamentals, none of us can hear it too many times. So I hope all the listeners just tune in to your podcast every episode just to be reminded. No, serious. Be reminded of these few fundamentals that allow you to be yourself.
I love it, Verne. Thank you so much and appreciate you, and God bless. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.